Humility, equity, anti-racism, lateral kindness, inclusivity, and trauma-informed, these are key aspects that we as a collective are asked to bring into our everyday lives, our work lives, so we can share space with each other, with humility, with kindness. I'm so excited to bring in amazing voices, social change leaders in the Prince George area, so that together we can hear about why it matters, what got them interested in what they represent in the community, and maybe even some tips for other leaders in the community of how to best serve all people. I'm really looking forward to this journey together. Welcome to another episode of Hope and Healing in the North. This episode topic is dear to my heart. We are talking about lateral kindness. I decided to start doing lateral kindness work a few years ago. Actually, it first started after my first degree in my undergrad in anthropology, and I was doing social research to understand the systemic abuses and power abuse structures, and I was looking through things with a decolonial lens. I wanted to know why people had harmed each other through all time and space, and why we were at some of the issues that we have today. What I realized at the end of my degree and all of my digging was that it all comes down to kindness. Kindness to ourselves, kindness to others, and kindness to the environment. And when we fall away from that, we get symptoms. And then we spend so much time treating those symptoms. But if we could come back to the core solution, which is kindness, this is what I realized through that social research. But then I thought, how do I share that? How do I create a meaningful way to share this with other people? And so I was inspired by a lady named Denise Finley, who does a lot of lateral violence work in BC. And I know that lateral violence has been something notably worked on with Indigenous communities and organizations. But then I started to do more research, and I saw how tied it is to decolonization, to equity, to safe spaces, to trauma-informed. Lateral violence and lateral kindness work is all about power relations and how we treat one another and how we show up in the world. And where does that come from? Our core beliefs. And where do our core beliefs come from? And so welcome to this episode where I'm sharing with Stacey Yates about the definition I created for lateral kindness and her very important work that she's doing with lateral kindness as she's impacting healthcare. We know that lateral violence is a term coined through nursing. It's when a social behavioral psychologist noticed these key trends in nursing and came up with the term lateral violence, because lateral violence means when the oppressed becomes the oppressor. And so through Stacey's key wisdom and understanding, we're able to pull apart threads and aspects of what it means to have a laterally kind environment, what it means to start showing up as social change leaders and other people just in our day-to-day lives. Lateral kindness truly is a response, and a solution-based response to some of the harder situations that we all face. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Yeah, so welcome, Stacey.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, introduce yourself how you see fit.
I am Stacey Yates. I am a registered nurse in Northern BC. I've worked in a few different capacities as a nurse throughout my career in both a direct care, acute care capacity, primarily with children and families. And then also I've worked with lots of students at all levels throughout their nursing education in and out of acute care.
Nice. That's so great to have you. You have a lot of different lenses, both individually and in educational capacities. I'm curious what your thoughts are on lateral kindness.
I have lots of them. So my experience working in healthcare for more than a decade, nursing has a notorious reputation for violence against each other, like lateral violence particularly is the term that they use. We hear about it in nursing school about how nurses eat their young and they don't treat the new nurses or the nursing students very kindly. And we start to brace new nurses for this as soon as they are entering school and trying to teach them things like strategies to try to stop it. And in my career, I have experienced a lot of it. Directly and indirectly, I have witnessed a lot of it between all levels of nursing, departments of nursing, but also within other auxiliary health providers, whether they're like speech and language, OT, PT, in collaboration and in conflict with other disciplines. Within the hospital setting, it makes it really hard to work in a department and feel like you are safe and that you belong and that you can show up fully to support and care for your patients when there's so much toxicity in the work environment every day.
Okay, so that's huge. So you're saying that lateral violence has been known to be pervasive in nursing.
Yeah.
It's actually been coined as a term found by a psychologist for something that was going on with nurses in the healthcare system. Why do you think that is?
I think my thoughts around this have changed a lot over time. When we started, I thought it was more like an attitudinal thing of this is how I was treated in nursing school, and so we're going to carry this on as a hazing tradition almost. But I think the more that I understand and look a little bit deeper at the layers that might be here, I think it has a lot more to do with the trauma that others have experienced either in their personal lives before they enter into the career, and then being exposed to a lot of traumatic events repeatedly throughout their careers. And you have a whole bunch of hurt and injured people working together in a system that doesn't have enough resources or support, and it's not necessarily identified by the health systems, by society, by the individuals, and they may or may not be aware of the trauma that they've experienced earlier in their lives to start with. So
they start offshedding on each other because
Yeah.
like they can't even sustain or manage it themselves.
Yeah, and I think part of it bubbles over as an inadvertent expression of how they're feeling. It's hard to explain what nursing looks like. I feel like you almost have to go backwards to try to break down what the role of a nurse is, because we have so many different levels and the job is so different depending on what kinds of departments you're working in, or if you're working in outpatient public health or promotion and prevention, or if you're doing home and community care or mental health nursing, or acute care nursing is with inpatients who are in a hospital, or whether you are doing education. You can be a nurse and have so many different types of jobs. I think it is tricky for the general population maybe to fully understand what nursing actually is. And I don't think that's anyone's fault. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think it's really hard to pin down exactly what it is because they do so many different jobs.
So what is it? What is nursing?
Nursing is a lot of everything. You are a teacher, you are a support person, you are an educator, you are a professional, you are supposed to be an expert and knowledgeable in so many different areas. You could be a specialist and have one really niche area that you are an expert in your field. Or you can stay as a generalist and you can do a little bit of everything. You can go into research and you can contribute into literature and academia. You could be a full-time educator and preparing new nurses. You might be working for things like discharge planning and consulting or assessment for patients and families who need resources in the community and making connections for support. And sometimes you're doing all of these jobs all at once. When I think about an inpatient unit, you're doing a little bit of all of these things. You're a hub for all of the other disciplines with more specialty, and you need to know a little bit about everything to know who to talk to, to know who to consult, referrals to make, how to help people get what they need.
It's always healthcare related though.
Typically.
Yeah. Yeah.
Typically.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of personal care as well because we're with people at some of their highest highs in their lives and their lowest lows. We're with people through some of the hardest and most traumatic moments of their lives. And we can walk out of one room where a family is having great news about a treatment path that might be going well for them, only to walk next door to a family who is experiencing maybe one of the hardest days of their life. and you have to.
So if it was a healthy environment, these things like lateral violence wouldn't be happening. So we know that lateral violence is when the oppressed becomes the oppressor. And so and lateral violence can show up not just in nursing, but it is fundamental and key and talked a lot about in nursing. But these behaviors also show up in other dynamics that when it comes to power relations and people. And so what is it with nursing, do you think, that there's an oppressive and power dynamic? What is going on there for people to need to cope so much in that environment?
Loaded question. So I think the health organizations as a whole are a massive bureaucratic institution, right? So you have many levels of different types of leadership, management that need to be organized and coordinated. They are very complicated, just in the funding structure, let alone the organizational breakdown and how they show up. And for the nursing staff and the front of house kind of care staff, facility services, food services employees, we put us on an organizational chart near the bottom. And so I think probably the hierarchy creates a little bit of that structure, even though we're the people who are day in, day out, all night long, in direct contact with patients and families and providing all that care. There's also some of the historical power dynamics that still exist between physicians and nurses and societal or organizational perceptions of import. Who is getting priority? Who is getting thank yous? Who is getting recruitment? Who is getting bonuses? Those have never been even either. And they're trying very hard to correct some of these pieces, but the perception and the kind of understanding historical hierarchy is still there as an undertone, I think. And then we can go back a long way and talk about the history of nursing and where it came from and who the original nurses were with Florence Nightingale and the power dynamics that existed there, and all of the history of the profession trying to work through bureaucracy, patriarchy, societal values to prove themselves as worthy as a profession, to get rid of some of the stigma that was associated with the original nurses.
What were the original nurses? What does that mean?
So if we look at it from the context of Florence Nightingale, which is a Eurocentric perspective of where nursing has come from, and definitely isn't inclusive. But what's being taught, or what has been taught in nursing school historically, is that she's the accepted mother of nursing. We're trying to shift that narrative now and make it more inclusive and include all the rest of the contributors that have put into the foundations of nursing, because all of that care existed well before Florence. Anyway, she was from an affluent family. She broke out on her own, decided that she would help people who were really unwell or sick or poor, to her family's lack of approval. The nursing professionals who are working today are so amazing. They are so capable. They are so knowledgeable. Nursing contributes a large amount of knowledge and research and data into the academic world. The body that they create and are involved in is expansive. They are looking at leadership, they're looking at acute care. We're influencing so many different facets of our social life, documenting, gathering data to inform change, to inform policy, to inform best practice, to inform other research. But all of that work to prove themselves as legitimate has come from the minimizing of a nursing profession, from society, from like previous historical kind of physician imbalance in value. So you're almost trying to prove yourself all the time that you are worthy and you are valuable and you are knowledgeable and you can contribute. I think if we look at society and you asked any person in the community, unless they have a family member who's a nurse, if you ask them what a nurse's job is, they probably don't know. But the number of nurses that are existing in the profession here in BC, Prior to the amalgamation of a couple other professions within the BC College of Registered Nurses and Midwives, we were 40,000 people. And then we've taken on LPNs, midwives as well, and pulled them into our healthcare providers licensing as well. So we're probably somewhere in the neighborhood around like 65 or 70,000 people in the province alone who are healthcare providers under the nursing licensing body.
Nice.
I've had conversations with people whose parents are physicians, and they look at their nursing textbooks and what they need to know and are shocked at the volume of knowledge that our new nurses are onboarding and need to know to actually participate in care of their patients. There is so much more than just being someone who shows up and takes instruction from someone else. You are an advocate, you are a professional, you are knowledgeable, you can engage in research and education and best practice and clinical decision making, and it's just so much more than that to be able to work with your patients.
What I see is little girls will say, I want to be a nurse, and then boys will say, I want to be a doctor, or boys will say that they want to build cars or things like that. And so we have these girls that want to become nurses because it's maternal and caring and loving, and we're natural nurturers. I think females are natural nurturers, but I think it's also socially modeled and shown to be a nurturer.
I know, even looking at my grandma's own life history, when she was presented with career options, she's basically given 4. And all of them were somewhere around domestic labor, childcare, nursing, or teaching. There's the perception of what's an acceptable job for a woman, and certainly historically that was one of the pieces for nursing. The challenge, I think, with those sort of stereotypical female roles is that they societally are expected and not necessarily valued by society the same way or held to the same sort of esteem historically like a physician or a lawyer. And they are arguably, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a social worker, whether you are a nurse, they are as important as all of the other professions because we are caring for everyone or raising
hard work,
children, right? Like human services work is demanding and it is really important.
Even the schooling, like taking that degree is one of the hardest degrees.
I think so, but I'm biased. I haven't done any other ones.
I watched with my peers at university, I watched all kinds of people with all kinds of undergrads, and it was definitely one of the most demanding ones.
Yeah, there's a culture, I think, in nursing between what the expectations are and my experience and what I've seen for a long while after is it's pretty typical to see nursing students at the beginning of the semester, not again until there's a long weekend, Christmas break, not again until reading break, and then at the end of the year, because they are so busy doing everything that they need to do to prepare for their labs and their exams, and there are so many papers to write and the research. It is incredibly demanding, and with those demands to be hitting the level of expectation that exists in nursing school, to be a safe care provider, to show up and actually be able to do well for the patients and families you're caring for, it takes time. And you sacrifice for that, which I think some of the sacrifice and the nurturing you've already mentioned in those female-dominated caring, nurturing roles that becomes expected of us.
Isn't it a juxtaposition, though? This is what I see. Because if it's so demanding and there's no room for self-care, and so nurses aren't able to actually stay healthy with those kinds of demands and that kind of work-life balance.
It requires an active effort to care for yourself and a lot of advocacy and boundaries. Certainly, I know a lot of nurses who are able to take really good care of themselves, and I don't think it is without cost. Right? So you have to prioritize yourself to care for other people, whether it's the people who are in your family or the people that you're caring for at the bedside. You can't pour from an empty cup. You have to figure out how to fill your own. But you have to make the time to be able to fill your cup. And so being able to articulate it and to figure out what that is first is one thing. And then also feeling like you're worth that and worthy of that time to fill your own cup and that it's not selfish, it's actually necessary, is another hurdle to make that happen. And then some of the other pieces that need to be in place are things like extended medical benefits. We're really super lucky through most of our health professions that the benefits package now is becoming more recognizing of things like your mental health and your physical health and the pieces that need to be there for you to care for yourself, to care for others. But it is with cost. You sacrifice your evenings and nights or weekends, holidays with your families, your physical health, because we know that being awake overnight and working late nights, if you're a shift worker, takes years off your life.
And compassion fatigue.
Absolutely. And the impact on your relationships and the social energy that's required and the emotional energy that's required to care and be present for your patients because they need you. And then what do you have left when you go home with your family? Certainly my experience has been that there are days where you don't have that and you need time to be able to recover, to actually be able to fully engage in your life again. It's not without cost.
So we know with internalized violence, it starts to come out in external forms, and that's like lateral violence, right? And so I think it's really key when you said the nurses that eat their young. So what is it that happens there? Is it that there's senior nurses that then when there's new nurses that come on because of this power dynamic, they replicate how the senior nurse replicates how they've been treated as a new nurse? Is that what's going on?
Yeah. So often that is the experience. So certainly when I was in my first years of nursing, I met several people like that who were just unkind, that they would be snappy with you or rude to you. I never experienced any sort of like outright hazing, but they would not be very patient and understanding of the learning experience that is required for you to get to their level. It's not like you jump out of nursing school and suddenly you have everything you need to know. It takes multiple years within one area before you are an expert, like 10,000 hours to be an expert. So how long does it take you to hit that? It's going to probably take you close to 5 years to be an expert. And certainly for that first year and a half, bringing in any area coming out of school, it's going to take you quite a while. You have a lot of learning to do just on the job and all the ins and outs and the paperwork and the extra pieces that need to happen and the advocacy and all these other pieces that you wouldn't have got to experience necessarily. And then you have to get good at it. So it takes time. And sometimes I think people who've been in the career for a while forget what those first years are like and how hard they can be and what it feels like the first time you really screw something up, or how long it used to take you to fill out admission paperwork or something like that. And they get impatient or short, and they sometimes directly or indirectly ridicule, or you might have gossipy, toxic behavior in departments, or marginalizing or isolating somebody who is newer.
Making you do tedious tasks on purpose to make you feel incompetent.
It's not something I've ever experienced, but I know that lots of these pieces exist.
Yeah.
Right? And I've heard a lot from students about what their experiences have been elsewhere over the years, whether it's just unkind tones, snappy, people being blatantly rude to them, devaluing them, dismissing them, just really...
Right. We could look at this card because in this awesome card deck that we've been sharing with each episode, Cards Against Inequity, it says, what is a microaggression? A statement, action, or incident, whether intentional or unintentional, that is perceived as hostile, derogatory, or a negative slight and insult about one's marginalized identity. Microaggressions can appear as compliments, but the impact is negative. I would say also not just marginalized identity, but microaggressions can be a demeaning thing for anyone where they were trying to demean them. For example, asking where are you from or where are you really from sends the message that people of color cannot be from Canada and reinforces ideas of difference and marginalization. So in the context of lateral violence, microaggressions can be eye rolls or create anything that creates this toxic kind of culture. Hey?
Absolutely.
People describe it as this smog that like just fills the room. You can just feel it.
Absolutely. And I think that very slowly there is more attention being called into those microaggressions, and the training needs to come with it. Because my experience in having these conversations around things like microaggressions is a lot of people aren't aware that what they are saying or doing is inappropriate at all or harmful to others. in any capacity.
Because they've been treated that way, likely.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking about the learner example. When they were a learner, they were likely treated like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Or they witnessed it, or they grew up with people who would ask other people about where they were from or where they were really from. And they don't necessarily mean any harm, but they also don't understand what harm it causes to people over time. I'm seeing more of that now that we're getting more travel nursing. There's more diversity showing up in the areas that where I work. Certainly, like, it's a frequent occurrence, very frequent. And I want so badly for us to get to a point where everybody has the same baseline understanding about what the impact is for someone who experiences this, not just once, but likely repeatedly over time, and what that would do to them as a person and how that makes them feel in a working environment and in the rest of their life. I think with kindness and empathy and awareness of your own perceptions and how you engage with the world, where you come from, what your ideas are, you become more aware of the behaviors that are not appropriate and are not acceptable and are harmful to others. And I think through that, you also maybe get some more awareness about your own experience and how you've been treated as well.
So what are some key things if people were listening and they thought, hey, like maybe I'm going through something like lateral violence? What are some key things that someone could note? It could be, do you feel safe to share ideas in a group environment?
Absolutely. Do you hesitate? Like, if you're a healthcare worker, do you hesitate before you go and talk to someone else and think about the person that you're going to go and have an interaction with? Or do you go and choose someone else? What has your previous experience been? What does the environment look like as you walk into the department? Are they kind to you? Do they acknowledge you? Do they say hello? Do they say thank you? Or are you left without any sort of acknowledgement, orientation? Anything? Do you get snappy responses when you come into the department? Are people dismissive of you? There's so many.
It almost starts to feel like this toxic like soup. So if your work environment was like a soup broth that now you're in, what can people start to do? Because it can feel very limiting once you're already in it.
It does. So you can...
That's when we start to move through to lateral kindness.
Yeah. And so for me, what I started to see in the departments that I was working in that had some of these sort of typical, stereotypical, toxic characters is I made it my mission for them to become my friend. I don't know what that says about me, but I would just show up and be really nice. I would come in, I would do my job. I never made any sort of extra effort to win you over because I never felt like I needed to win you over. But I also I believe kindness goes a long way. I think the basics is a please and thank you. I really appreciate that. I had a really great day working with you. Thanks so much. Today was rough, but I'm really glad I was working with you. Make a massive difference in your overall environment because people watch it and then they feel better and then they start doing it.
Right, you're mirroring it to them and hoping their mirror neurons catch on too.
Yeah.
So you were doing it from a regulated place. You weren't doing it from a fawn response.
Yeah, I think it was very much like, I need to work in this department, and if we're going to work, I would like for it to be pleasant. Because I think at the end of the day, like, we would all love to go to work and just feel safe to be
How do you
ourselves.
know that's not fawn though?
My fawn is like quiet and retreat. And so for me, it was more of an active effort. It was a choice to show up, to be engaged with this person, and because we needed to work together and be effective. If I try and fawn out of this, then I'm also not an effective care provider for my patients because I will not engage with you as early as I should or as actively as I should. I may not take the same sorts of direct steps to engage with you if there's a problem or something that needs to be addressed with my patient, which delays their care. That's not acceptable. We can't put our patients in harm's way because of the relationships that we have in the department. So I need to be able to work with you effectively so that our patients get good care. And because you know what? I also want to have a really nice day.
So you're seeing the wider picture, you're seeing the bigger picture of what really matters and why you're there.
Yeah.
Rather than dropping into that often childhood response of, if I can provide what that makes this person happy, then I'll be safer. Because that's what fawn would be.
And not at all.
You are seeing the provider perspective of what matters for the whole and modeling it. That's Emotional intelligence.
Yes.
I do think that lateral kindness requires a lot of emotional intelligence. So I'm curious. I made this definition for lateral kindness, and I'm curious what you think of it and unpacking it a little bit and seeing if it relates to something like in the work environment when you're discussing lateral violence in terms of with nursing. So an active process which creates humble celebration of one another in a group environment and allows for individuals to feel safe, to be their genuine selves. Lateral kindness is characterized by healthy uses of power dynamics and equity models. The space emerges as one of kindness due to secure and open relations that have the freedom to express amongst one another within the constructs of the group purpose. It is a space where all will be uplifted, appreciated, and encouraged. Lateral kindness is possible through a specific process of unlearning and relearning of beliefs, cycles, coping responses, and adaptations learned intergenerationally. This is only possible with using bravery to speak openly and honestly, which builds trust once again.
Yeah.
Power dynamics and equity models. Healthy uses of power dynamics.
Yeah. So I think as a nurse, like we all have the ability to fully show up in our power. Like we have a position of power at the bedside with our patients. We are in a perceived position of power. We're supposed to be the experts. So for us to be able to show up for them, we need to be able to do that in a place where we can fully show up human, I think. I can show up disconnected. But my experience is our patients don't remember the direct care that you gave really well. They don't care how perfectly square your dressing is. They don't care that the edges are perfectly sealed or that all of your IV lines are perfectly straight and have no tangles in them. We all like that, but that's not what they remember. What they remember is the connection that you make with them. That's what really impacts their care and their care experience. So for me to be able to do that, I have to be in a good place mentally and emotionally to show up for them. And for me, what that looks like is in my authenticity. I need to show up as my full self in my professional role at the bedside for me to be a good care provider. For me to be able to show up in my authenticity, I need to be safe. And so what does that look like for me to create that space for myself or my colleagues? Because I know this doesn't just apply to me. And I think that is creating a safe space that looks like kindness, like genuine, authentic kindness, where I see your value and you see mine, and I appreciate you, and you're able to eventually appreciate me if you're the person who's being aggressive to me, because we are all important to each other. I need you in this day to make sure that all of our patients get what they need. Our patients need us. You have value and I have value. You have strengths that might be different than mine. I'm certainly not the kind of person who really loves to be super emotionally connected. I get uncomfortable in those situations, but my working partner is amazing at that. So we would work together. I would help him where my strengths were, more of a critical care kind of focus, and he would do a really great job of looking after the emotional care of my patient's family members, because that's his strength. And so we are able to see each other's strengths and value in that and be so grateful for each other and how our patients win when we can both be our best.
Safe spaces, kindness, done. We just know the answer, and then it's no more complicated than that, right?
I wish. I wish.
I know. And why is it made so much more complicated? Because, so say if you're working in that space and you've got some colleagues and they're working in that space and they're wanting to motivate and uplift one another in good ways, what then becomes the rub? Where's the rub?
So I think that piece is that we're human and that we're different. And I think that whether we realize it or not, we've all entered a caring profession for a reason. And so for some people, they are those little girls or boys who grow up wanting to be a nurse and wanting to care for other people. They may have seen somebody in their family, or this idea came into their head early as a kid, and that's all they've ever wanted to do. Those are the born to be's.
Or trans person.
But they're a very small portion, I think, of the nursing population. The rest of the nursing population, I think, is looking for like a way to care for others and may or may not realize that they're also looking for a way to care for themselves in ways they may not have received early in life, or somebody has hurt them and they can care for others and still protect themselves while also healing themselves.
They want like a power over?
No, I think it's more of a like a self-healing.
Mm-hmm. So the wounded healer trying to heal themselves through healing others?
Yeah, really. I think that's a huge piece of it. And then I think there are others who enter nursing because they've had contact with healthcare earlier in life and want to give back to others. And then there are lots of pragmatic decision makers who make this choice because it is safe and they have lots of options. They have lots of ability to move through different areas throughout their career without switching careers. And it will give them the financial security or the benefits, whatever it is they need to make themselves secure and safe in their lives. Certainly, I'm probably towards that side as for why I entered nursing as a good pragmatic decision. And I had lots of choices, not knowing all of the underlying pieces about why I think I'm drawn into this caring career.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What brought you into this career? What's your story? Why does it matter so much to you? Do you identify with that wounded healer aspect?
Yes. So I think what initially brought me in is I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I knew that I needed to make a decision, and I knew that I wanted to be financially independent and secure and not ever have to worry about being stuck if something ever happened to my life plan, whether things happen. So that's where it started. And then I really enjoyed caring for people. When I was a teenager, I worked in somewhat of a, like an assisted living facility. And I made really great connections with the residents who were there. And I loved being a part of their weekly routine and like getting to know them. They become your family almost. And like you're important to them and they're important to you. And that reciprocal relationship becomes really important in both of your lives. And I really enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the joy that it brought them and the impacts on their families as well. And so I think like that's an easy tie for me to see, okay, I like to work with other people. I like to support other people's families. Like maybe nursing would be a good move. Everything that I need is there. Being there, I would loved acute care. I am an adult diagnosed ADHD. How it got missed as a kid, I don't know. All the red flags were there. But nursing, especially in critical care, is a frequent change in tasks. Your job is never the same twice. You can be an expert in your field. It's lots of quick task changeover, very satisfying to get through all of your checks for things that you need to do. And then being able to provide patients and families with care and education that has the potential to positively impact their lives for the rest of their life. Working with little kids or moms and babies is probably my favorite space of teaching to do, or any sort of new diagnosis, chronic disease management, like asthma education or diabetes education, something like that. And empowering people to move forwards in their disease management. Okay, so you have a disease. It doesn't mean your life stops. You now just are going to live with this. This means you need to change this and this. And you probably should think about this, but you're still the same person. You still get to go out and engage in life. Your plans don't change for anything. You just have one extra piece you need to take with you. And trying to make them feel seen in that change, heard in their concerns.
Keep sharing hope.
Yeah. And I got to have a whole bunch of really amazing interactions with patients and families and start to watch those connections and changes happen. And I think that's very gratifying for me, and it fuels my why. And I also love the ability to impact other nurses who might also want to go and make change. So if you want to see a better healthcare system, I think the best way to do that is to gain allies. So you're in the position where, as a nurse, you're expected to take on students and train and preceptor other new nurses. And what better way to help support the vision that you have for what healthcare could look like than by pulling them in and being like, you know what, I think this might be amazing. What if you came into work and you felt appreciated? What if it was positive? What if people said thank you all the time? What if it was supportive for you to show up in these really stressful environments, not everybody's, but a lot of times they're stressful and traumatic. What if you felt supported in this? Wouldn't that be nice? Because I like coming to work and feeling like that versus coming to work into a team and thinking, oh, this is going to be a long shift. I don't want to show up in my work like that. I feel like at the point where you want to dread your job every day, it's probably a good time to leave your job and go do something else.
So you're really a social change leader for lateral kindness.
Yeah, I think so.
100%.
I didn't know it was a thing until we stumbled into a conversation. I was like, oh, there's a name for the thing that I think needs to exist.
Yeah. So piece by piece, what do you think of the definition then? So it's an active process. It does.
Yeah, very much. It has to be. It is a choice, and you engage in it every single day. Every single interaction is a choice. You have a choice when you make phone calls in the hospital, whether it's to the night housekeeper or whether it's with your unit clerk or whether it's calling food services or with your peer-to-peer colleagues or with a physician, in how you show up into that engagement. You can do it and be cranky or frantic or stressed because that's how your day is going, or you can pause for a second and just be happy and kind and thankful and patient and understand that their day probably also is busy and stressful.
It always has to be an active process because everyone's having a different type of day and everyone's interacting and they're in a different space each time they interact.
Absolutely.
And with different realizations of who they are or where their capacity's at all the time.
Very much.
Humble celebration of one another in a group environment. You've already expressed that and you've already shared that you share that with learners, and allows for individuals to feel safe to be their genuine selves. You're planting seeds so that they can be their authentic self and they can see you modeling that.
Yes, and it's not a discrete process. It's one of those pieces of like, I want you to be able to show up as who you are, like the professional version of who you are. Like you have boundaries in what you are allowed to present yourself as, but you need to show up as yourself. You need to not suppress who you are. Don't suppress whatever your passions are, if it's hockey or if it's knitting or whether you are a really loud and joyful person or you're more shy and reserved. Who you are as a healthcare provider is perfect. For sure, you're going to probably have to put yourself into some other situations that you may or may not like to be able to do your job fully as required. Certainly, like I said, I'm not the touchy-feely, like emotional person, but I know that about myself, and so I can push myself to do that part because it's needed.
So say you inspire people to be free, and then we know that oppressive environments are the opposite of free. Don't be free. They'll literally be punished for being free if the workplace is that saturated with lateral violence. They will get negative reinforcement for being free. So what happens, what can they be equipped to know then if they're going into spaces with this aspect of being their genuine selves, but now they got accepted to work in a place that's totally not conditioned that way, they're conditioned the other way?
I think you have a couple of choices. So you can stay in the environment and you can try and show up in your authenticity and just accept it is as it is and just carry on, and maybe you'll inspire some others, maybe it'll change. Or you can also move. You don't have to stay in that environment if it's not healthy for you. One of the things I feel like is coming up in conversations often amongst my colleagues is psychological safety and the need for psychological safety and what those factors are, and then making sure that our workplaces are also accountable to their pieces of that, and understanding that not everybody is going to want to be engaged in that conversation, but there are some people who will. And so whether you are getting together as a collective to have these conversations and advocate, or have an open conversation about what you want your department culture to be or your workplace culture to be, because it might not be a department, but my context is like acute care. I think you have to engage in a conversation about it and like what the expectations are, where you're struggling, what your needs are, how they can meet them better, how you can meet them better, creating boundaries for yourself. And it might look like you do your job and then you give yourself X amount of time before you start engaging in other things. Or maybe this workload isn't sustainable for you or anybody else. So then you need to start advocating into places like a union to make sure that you have your workloads reallocated or boundaries put on them by the union. So right now there's a whole bunch of legislation coming through about safe patient workloads because we know our staff are taking on so much not by choice, and it's unsafe for them and it's unsafe for their patients, and nobody is winning out of this situation. So if it's challenging, then maybe those guardrails need to be put into place to try and protect everybody else for a safe and manageable workload.
So it's really important to set those boundaries, but first one must know their rights.
Yeah.
And what are their rights around psychological safety?
Every worker has the right to a psychologically safe workplace. There's the 13 factors of psychological safety that are outlined by the Canadian government. All the provinces are in a different place in adopting them, and then the workplaces in WorkSafe BC have a formal process that they're currently working through to take them on and formally adopt them into their policies. It's still a work in progress for lots of places, but that would be step one. And then pulling them up and starting conversations. Right? If you don't feel safe to do that, maybe there's another path for you to do that. If you've got some sort of job occupational health and safety committee, or whether it's something like a respect in the workplace type function around whatever complaint process that needs to happen there, or maybe it's just one-to-one conversations with somebody who is a leader that you feel safe and comfortable with. Maybe it looks like advocacy or union involvement if you're a unionized employee. Maybe it looks like becoming a union steward so you can better educate yourself and educate your colleagues and your peers.
So what happens when, with microaggressions, we know that lateral violence can be insidious patterns of many different microaggressions that are hard to prove. They're hard to be objectively sure, and we know that in these union processes and things like that, there needs to be tangible evidence. Microaggressions can be very hard to prove. So how can someone assert their rights for psychological safety when some of that are those more microaggressive type behaviors?
They are really tricky, and that's, I think, where the WorkSafe policies come into place. They need to be really clear about what the expectations are, what the policies are, what the workplace culture expectations are as a whole. Like, you're going to conduct yourself in this way. This is what we accept. This is what we don't. This is why. And then provide the training that goes with it. Because I feel like that training piece is what's missed. You get the blanket training, or maybe like an online module or some new policy that comes out, but the actual social, emotional, peer-to-peer training sessions are what needs to happen so that people have the opportunity to do some self-examination, to reflect on themselves, to do an inventory of their own perceptions, or like a positionality, and like, how do you view the world? How do you view somebody else's world? What is their perception from their own life experience? What things make you think the way that you do? Where do your biases come from? Why do you think those? What
Absolutely.
like, that piece needs to be there, and I facilitated, not just as
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's why it is possible through a specific process of unlearning and relearning of belief cycles, coping response adaptations, learned intergenerationally. It's exactly what you're saying, and it's the only way to do it, that inner work.
Yeah.
And if it's done in a way that's also universally done with your own peers as well, it becomes normalized.
Yeah. And then I think you can have a conversation around setting the culture that you want. Because certainly, like, from larger organizations, they will set their standard with their organizational values and mission statements that are supposed to help guide all the policies and your priorities throughout the organizations. But every place I've ever worked has its own culture within the organization. So what culture do you want? Have an active conversation about what you want this to look like. What do you value? What are your values? What are your priorities? How do you want to show up at work? What's acceptable to you? What isn't? And then what do we do about it? Give the people the tools truly to both call out and call in people for conversations, making sure that you have a conflict resolution culture truly, and practice it.
And it can be trusted, because building of trust will allow people to open up more.
Yeah, and then you have to actually, like, the trust takes time. Like, all of these pieces take time. I would love to wave a magic wand and make it happen, but these changes are slow, and they involve all of us being responsible for ourselves, identifying our why and making an active decision to be involved in it, and then being patient as we do it, because it takes time. But I have to believe that we can change it. And I don't know if everybody needs like an example of what that looks like, but early in my career, I started having conversations with some of the like newer and up and coming nurses that I was in contact with. And I just said, be the change that you want to see. So what I would love to see that I think makes a huge difference is when you say thank you. And we'd had a conversation about it. I watched them start to implement it with their peers. The department that I was giving them the example about was not super supportive, wasn't very kind. It didn't really feel great to be in. But 2 years later, I was back in that department again with some of these young folks that I had crossed paths with earlier. And I watched them say, thanks for the great night. I really enjoyed working with you. See you tomorrow. Hope you have a great weekend. And then I watched it happen with every single other employee that was on that shift. And I thought, okay, so it's possible, right? Like all you're doing is saying thank you. But in that observation of that interaction for them, I felt the difference. But the other students that I was with also saw the difference. And they said, oh, it's so nice. Do you see how everybody says thank you to everybody? They appreciate each other. Oh, look at the relationships that they have here. This would be a really nice place to work.
It made me think about vicarious trauma, but in the reverse.
Absolutely.
It's the opposite of vicarious trauma, where it's, let's coin a term for that. It would be kindness, resiliency, like kindness mirroring. Like it's more than that, but it would be something amazing. It is something amazing. It's responding and regulating with one another on a deep level in a way that's opposite of vicarious trauma, and it's creating it safe.
Would you maybe call it like lateral kindness?
Yeah. Yeah.
Something like that?
No, I love that. So that keeps your wheels turning, hey? Yeah. And what part of the wounded healer aspect of your story that we haven't touched on yet makes that fulfilling for you?
I think that is the change piece. Like that is the action of the hope that I have. That is the manifestation of it. And I believe that we all have power and we all have agency. And when you're given the opportunity to show up in your authenticity, you can make a real tangible difference. And it doesn't have to be a huge action. It doesn't have to be. You can make these small connections and really, truly minimal effort to just say thank you. And it makes a huge difference in everybody's day. So imagine if we all did it. What would that be like to just show up in a department where everybody was grateful for each other? Because we can do all the self-care in the world. I can go for massage therapy and a walk and whatever. You can do all of that. All the self-care in the world, scientifically, is nowhere near as effective as gratitude and mindfulness. So if gratitude is the number one, let's practice that and just say thank you to each other and see how that impacts us.
I want to help untangle the roots of how it's a systemic process that's happening through power and elitism, right? So when you're talking about when it comes to that and dismantling some of that through some of those core beliefs, and then have examples of how core beliefs, which you've already said, everyone matters.
Yeah. There is a power dynamic that still exists. And I think it's from shifting with the kind of traditional mentality, not traditional, historical mentality of like physicians are more important than nurses, and moving to the collaborative model of physicians have a really specific, important role that they play in the care and health of patients and families. And so do nurses. Within the context of acute care, we can have the physicians. We need the physicians. I can't do my job as a nurse without the physicians. They also can't do their job without me. So we are equally important to each other. And that goes through the hierarchy of all the disciplines, whether it is nurse to physiotherapy or physiotherapy assistant or technician, or speech and language pathology, or like even the dynamic between a registered nurse and an LPN. There's still this perception, I think societally, that there's a hierarchy of power, where we really need to move to a team mentality of we are all on the same playing field. We just have different jobs that we fulfill, and we all really need each other to do this job well as a whole together.
I think that is the key piece of looking at those social conditioning like beliefs that we have. So that's from the oligarchy, it's colonial, it's this idea that there is someone above and then it falls through and down. And is that because of classism? Well, yeah, we do live in a classist social structure here in North America because that's the colonial narrative. So it's a belief that's chosen and said yes to. Now, is it because they've done more schooling? Is it because, like, where do we give that power? We give that social status. Is it because they've done so much more schooling? Is it because they are favored through a social schema? Is it because we say yes to that? Because as you've already said, there's so much work that nurses do as well.
Yes. And I think, pardon me, I think it's really complicated. I think it's really hard to separate one from another. I think they're very much all entangled because, pardon me, historically, even now, when you come into work as a nurse, you're checking the physician's orders. That is what they are. They write you an order for a medication or a treatment that needs to be completed for your patient, testing, things like that. It's an order. And then the person who is working, be it an RN or an LPN, healthcare aide, who's ever working within that context, then completes the physician's order. So it's a direction. So you're going to do this. They're directing you. And I think that is part of that power structure. Do I think I can get away from that? No. But I think the mental shift can happen because those orders come with a fully separate set of education that we are not given the same sorts of background to as a nurse.
Yeah, there's different skill sets. So a carpenter, there's a plumber, right? There's an electrician. They have different skill sets. They all equally matter.
Yes.
So for myself, I still have a feminist perspective in that in the way that male-dominated work has been historically more valued. And is there an element of that still showing up? Even if more nurses can be male and more doctors can be female, we can still have these historical narratives in what we share as a social story, right? And so is it that male work is more reputable? Do you think that's showing up?
Don't get me started. I think it's really hard because I have a bias working in this female-dominated profession, and I can use my own family as an example, and I have a number of times. My brother's a plumber, and I'm a nurse. Going to school between the two specialties, we go to school for the same amount of time. He comes out with a journeyman's Red Seal ticket for his plumbing, and I come out with a degree for nursing. When he went to school, he had grants from the government. They got paid EI while they were going to school. They had all of these benefits for buying their tools and all this funding available. And then they got paid apprenticeships. My brother went to school and got paid, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a lot of money, but they got paid something. Every year that they did their apprenticeship and their scope of practice increased, they got a little bit more until he was able to finish his journeyman's ticket, and then they get the full rate of pay within their employee or union, whatever their thing is. For the nurses, there's nothing. Maybe you're eligible for a student loan, but unless you're going to go and work in a rural or remote community that is eligible as deemed by financial aid, there's no forgiveness there. You're paying for that loan. If you want to go and do your practicum, they're paying to be in that practicum. They do not get paid. They don't get EI while they're going to school. They don't get any sort of grants for their tools that they need to do their job. So my brother and I, when we came out of school with equal education, there was an $80,000 difference financially between us. And that is where we're both starting our careers.
Wow.
And that is substantial between a male-dominated profession and a female one.
Yeah.
And even now, we finally have started to get to a point where they're giving a little bit to our students who are nursing students. It'll show up on a tax credit for them. But this is the first time ever with this tax season. And that's a lot of advocacy because of the inequity that exists between the male and female dominated professions. The same goes for teachers. When you're going to a teaching college, you don't get paid for your practicum either. There's a huge difference, I think.
And it shows social values and women's work being less valuable and just expected. Just doing the dishes and the laundry, and that's all a lot of work that could be done all day. Raising children is a full-time job.
Yeah. If you were a stay-at-home parent, I had seen something around, if you hired somebody to do every single one of those roles, so somebody to do the cooking, somebody to do the cleaning, somebody for childcare, a stay-at-home mom's job is like a $470,000 a year, and yet you get just to stay at home.
Yeah.
No. You work.
To oppression, right? Relating it to these power imbalances, relating it to the aspect that it's necessary to have equity models, to have lateral kindness in an environment. People want to be enough. They want to please, and they want approval from their superiors, whoever that is.
Yeah.
Whatever gender that is. They want, whoever's above them, they want that approval. And so oftentimes it can also be related to trauma. It can be related to, is it safe to have an authority over me, and how do I need to act and be in this environment in order to have this power dynamic and be okay in this power dynamic. And we talk a lot about safety, but those dynamics are happening in all work environments. And when we look at lateral kindness and lateral violence, they can also happen in any work environments, but they particularly happen in work environments that are of oppressed groups.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it's so difficult to try to figure out where that oppression comes from, right? Is it within the career itself? Is it within the whole hierarchy? Is it within the organization? Is it within the society? Or is it all?
Yeah.
Because,
when people are overburdened with stress, they start acting non-favorable. If people had all of their Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like tiers, met, so they had all of their survival needs met, their love and connection needs met, they had everything met, they would be working from their best selves, right? And so when people are really stressed, those other behaviors start to come out to one another. And yeah, I'm really curious. When you talk about this with nursing, it can be applied also to benefit those who are experiencing this in other settings. So what kind of skills and aptitudes do you think you would want people to glean from that are service providers in the northern area?
Oh, such a good question. First of all, anybody involved in healthcare, anybody at any level, I think we need to become very aware of adverse childhood experiences in the context of the patients and people that we work with and for, and ourselves. Because those early life experiences, regardless of perceived severity, can absolutely impact your attachment, which would be the second piece I want us to look at, and how you interact with everyone that you come in contact with for the rest of your life. So adverse childhood experiences and ACEs and attachment. For a health context, in applying it to our patients, I think we really need to take a close look at that, because it so heavily impacts your likelihood of developing chronic disease. And I think it would shift the way that we look at disease with our patients, what the teaching would be around the disease and disease management, and what they could actually do as interventions to help heal themselves that would better impact their disease management if we come at it from a really emotional, nervous system, early child life perspective.
Biopsychosocial model.
If we shift the values, I think it would change the way that we provide support in the community and we do care planning and education. I would love, love, love to see more resources, support, and focus go into maternal child health, because the health of the mother impacts the health of the unborn baby. That baby and mother dynamic, or any parent dynamic, and any parent who's directly involved with that child, in those early years of life, particularly the first 2, but definitely the first 8, set the path for all of the neural connections that they're going to make for the rest of their life. Empower them with the knowledge and understanding of what that means. Support people proactively before they have babies, when they are pregnant, after they have their baby and into those early childhood years in a really meaningful way. Because I think we'll have a better, healthier, supported society if we come at it from that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
From the people who are adults who've already experienced this, if we recognize and give it the weight and value that it deserves, you might actually allow these adults to identify them and start to heal. And if you can heal it, then you will be able to have better, healthier relationships, will support your overall health, decreasing loneliness, decreasing impacts on your health and being throughout the rest of your life.
So how do we inspire culture to go, okay, it's time to feel things, to heal things? How do we actually inspire people when it has been not the norm to do?
I think it is really tricky because it is going to take some very brave people to show up in their authenticity, feeling safe and secure about themselves and uncaring about what the rest of the world thinks, to provide a model. And it's going to be tricky because it means that you're in a vulnerable place and you're going to have all the resources in place for yourself to deal with whatever gets triggered for you in working through this process, but knowing that you're on a path that is going to impact change because of these small connections that you're going to have with other people, just like being kind. Mm-hmm. And I think those examples show up in healthcare, I think, right from the time that they enter school. I think that we really need to examine the culture that we set and the expectations and how we show up in our interactions with the students and the modeling, so that they have permission to be authentic and to be seen and be heard and have their actual needs met and start to build that self-awareness that needs to happen for them to get there.
So say someone is a lateral violence facilitator. They enjoy it. Maybe they don't enjoy it, but they certainly are part of the problem, and maybe they know it because they're frictioning with the idea of changing or doing that inner work. Because there are people in the population that do not want to look at themselves. They do not want to do the inner work. When we're talking about and wanting to inspire that growth for folks, a lot of people are the type of people that would be willing to self-reflect if it felt safe enough and supported enough to do. But there's a statistical amount that wouldn't want to.
Absolutely.
What do we say for those types of people? Like, what to lean in maybe, or to encourage them to seek help in a different lens than for the rest of the population?
I think it's one of those pieces that's going to involve time and patience and compassion and understanding, because there's probably something that's happening for that person as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so
it has happened.
Yeah. So there's a whole bunch of other underlying pieces, and that the relationships are probably needed to start to have some of those more direct conversations. So I think the modeling is part of it, and setting the tone and what the culture actually is, because sometimes people will buy into the tone change because they just haven't experienced anything different. I've worked with nurses who are more senior than me, and they'll come into the line that we're working on. So a line is like a shift with our other colleagues, and like we function differently than what they're used to with their line mates, because most of us don't change. Once you're in a position, in a permanent position, you work with the same people on a rotating shift.
Okay.
And if you stay there for a long period of time, you might not cross over with somebody else who works in opposite to you and work with them directly for decades. So I've had people come over to the other line and say, oh, I so like that you guys help each other with an admission. Like, we don't do this on my line, but I like that you guys divide up who's going to take the history and who's going to do the assessment, and the other person puts the chart together and processes your orders for you. And they might just buy in from that. Other people, you might need to have some other conversations or build a relationship with them first to be like, what's happening for you? I'm seeing that you seem to be upset or something's happening. I'm wondering what's going on for you, because you also might not understand the rest of their personal context. Maybe there's something else that has happened in their lives and it's falling apart, or they've got a sick family member. And I don't think it's realistic to expect people to leave their whole lives at the door like most of us were taught.
Mm-hmm.
When you enter the hospital, the rest of your life gets left at the door.
Hmm.
I don't think that's a realistic expectation. You're a whole person. The rest of those pieces come with you, whether you like
Most
it or
professional
not.
settings expect that.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a realistic expectation. We need to
Well,
shift that very much. Don't get me wrong, don't bring all the negative stuff in with you. You do need to be present to do your job, but the compassion can still be there of you got something else going on outside of work that's calling your attention. So maybe you can't be here 100%. So if you are only here 80 and your rest of your teammates need to be able to pick up the 20 that you can't do, you need to communicate with us because the plans are pretty good. We can pick up that 20 for you. You just need to let us know so that we can do that.
And be aware that you're asking people to do that.
Yeah. And it needs to be a conversation to engage in. And I think most people want good things for each other, really, truly. And if you are one of those people who's perpetuating lateral violence, I think that other people are suffering in that as well, just vicariously, just being in proximity to it. So if we can get you to stop it, the rest of us win as well.
Some people, they need to get the violence out of them so they're not feeling it. So they need to offload it onto others.
You can have a safe space to vent.
Yeah.
If that's a part of your cultural norm, if you have a safe place to be able to do that. If you have some sort of critical incident, there is things like critical incident counselors that can be called in. But I really think that it's going to be one of those calling in conversations. Like somebody needs to sit down with you. Maybe it's not me, maybe it's another one of your friends, because I suspect there's probably something else that's happening for you. If you're suffering from burnout, whether you have got so much vicarious trauma from your working environment or previous life and or life stuff, you might just need a safe place to actually sit down and have that conversation and have someone refer you and be like, I'm really worried about you. Have you had a chance to talk to anybody about this?
Right.
Have you thought about going to counseling? Maybe it would be a good idea. And you might need to have that conversation more than once. And if that still is ongoing, you have other pathways that you can follow with things like your leadership or respect in the workplace, those kinds of pieces. But often,
don't make someone a mental, emotional punching bag for you to offload.
Absolutely. You need to have self-awareness.
Take that out in a different way, process it in a different way, and that's your self-responsibility.
Absolutely. You're responsible to deal with it, but if you're also not aware of what's happening because you've been taught to shove everything down and you've been in a culture that has previously been accepting of toxic behavior, it might be really hard to wrap your head around the shift that needs to happen, and sometimes those conversations just need to be there as the initial.
The person that then says, hey, we need boundaries, healthy boundaries, can be scapegoated, because if the norm in that system is that we don't talk about those things, they will turn towards and take it out on that person saying, hey, we need healthy boundaries.
Absolutely.
And that can often happen.
And it might not be a safe place for you. And I think part of the challenge for people who've experienced trauma or experienced being mistreated by important people in your life, like a parent, neglected, and you've always had to try, and if I just tried a little bit harder, then maybe. If I just did this one more thing, then maybe they would. If I just got the right grades, if I just did we have a tendency to carry that through the rest of our lives and put up with maltreatment for far longer than anyone healthy would.
Anyone with a healthy attachment would not put that much effort. They would go, okay, this is really unhealthy.
Bye.
There's nothing I can actually do about that, and I'm going to go and put myself into a healthy situation. Yep. Now, some people may not be able to, or they feel that they're not able to for real logistical, economical reasons. Or maybe, like I know for some in smaller communities, it can be, I'll have to sacrifice actually even having family then if I have to move away.
Yeah.
And so they pick staying in belonging even if it's abusive.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the tricky dynamic that exists, because it requires you to dissociate yourself to do your job. And if you're going to have to make that decision because it is what's economically required for you to survive, or it's attached to your familiar support in a community or something like that, comes at a cost to you. And you're going to have to make a decision about whether or not that's okay for you and acceptable for you. But that's an individual decision for everybody to make. You might be okay to just show up into that workplace that is not serving you for any other reason other than to make sure that you can fund your life. And if that's okay and acceptable to you, then that's also okay and acceptable. But it has to be to you. It can't be a one-size-fits-all.
And to validate yourself that maybe you're not sick, you're having a response to a sick environment, and to not gaslight yourself, to validate yourself.
Yeah.
And to know that. So when you say they disconnect from themselves, like they would start to get unwell.
Absolutely. Right? How do you show up as only part of yourself? How do you go into your work environment and feel like you can't be yourself every day? That's really tiring. That's really stressful. That's harmful to you as a person.
I think that's going to resonate for a lot of people, though. And it is a lot of people that have had to. That's why people form masks when they're not authentic. Like, I love neurodivergent people because they just show up. They're like, we're the game changers. We're authentic. We can't even help it. So here you go. But there are so many people who have these conditioned masks in order to survive, or in order to belong, or in order to be accepted. And they don't even recognize anymore that they're wearing a mask because they think it's who they are as a personality. And so I think it would resonate with a lot of people that, okay, I've adapted for this, or this is normalized. Well, it would cause too much change and unraveling in order to say no more to an unhealthy environment.
Oh, it's so scary.
And it's often a fish in the water. The fish does not see the water in the fishbowl until they jump out. And so that's the importance of having examples of laterally kind spaces, because once they are immersed in that environment, they can go, whew.
Yeah.
And then even if they have to go back, or if they do go back, they will see it now. The consciousness does not change completely after it's stretched and sees new things.
Yeah.
And so that modeling that you talked about with the gratitude, hey, thank you, and starting to show that, people are affected by it. And so change does matter. Those little things of kindness do matter, but also just big things of kindness.
Oh, I love big things of kindness, but we'll set the bar really low and just do things that are achievable. In an everyday setting, just start with the things that are achievable, that aren't going to have a huge cost to you, financially, time-wise, psychologically, emotionally. Everybody can say thank you. How long does it take to say thank you?
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.